Lydia Cartwright was the kind of grandmother who seemed almost too perfect for the world she lived in. Elegant and poised, she could charm anyone with her smile, her laugh, and her seemingly endless warmth. She was the heart of her small Midwestern town, a woman who spent her days tending to her award-winning garden, organizing charity events, and hosting lavish dinners that everyone clamored to attend. But behind the carefully tended roses and the sparkling china plates lay a woman who carried secrets, a woman who was more vulnerable and complicated than anyone could have imagined. It began innocently enough, as most tragedies do. Lydia's grandson, Daniel, had spent every summer at her countryside estate since he was a boy. The sprawling property, with its wildflower meadows and picturesque lake, was the perfect place for carefree adventures and lazy afternoons. This particular summer, Daniel had brought his best friend, Kyle. Kyle was everything a grandmother could hope for in her grandson's best friend. Polite, charming, and brimming with youthful energy. At 20, he had the kind of magnetic personality that made people gravitate toward him. Lydia welcomed him with open arms, delighted to see Daniel so happy in his company. But as the weeks passed, something began to shift. At first, Lydia dismissed it as her imagination. The way Kyle's compliments lingered just a little too long. The way his gaze seemed to hold hers in ways that felt uncomfortably intimate. She told herself it was nothing, that Kyle was simply a flirt by nature, the kind of young man who didn't realize the effect he had on people. But deep down, a part of her enjoyed the attention. It had been years since anyone had looked at her that way. What Lydia didn't know was that Kyle wasn't as innocent as he seemed. Beneath his easy smile and effortless charm was a young man who had spent most of his life navigating chaos. His childhood was a blur of broken promises and abandonment, and he'd learned early on that the only person he could rely on was himself. Lydia, with her wealth, her kindness, and her loneliness, was a vulnerability he couldn't resist exploiting. The first time they kissed was in the garden. It was late at night, the air heavy with the scent of roses and the hum of crickets. Lydia had been sitting on the stone bench under the willow tree, lost in thought when Kyle appeared. They talked for hours, their conversation drifting from light-hearted banter to deeper, more personal confessions. When Kyle leaned in, Lydia didn't stop him. For one fleeting moment, she felt alive in a way she hadn't since her husband had died. But the guilt hit her almost immediately. She told herself it was a mistake, that it couldn't happen again. Yet, as the days turned into weeks, the pull between them grew stronger. Their stolen moments in the garden became more frequent, their whispered conversations more intimate. Lydia knew it was wrong, but she couldn't bring herself to end it. And Kyle? He wasn't about to let her. What Lydia didn't realize was that Kyle was playing a dangerous game. For him, the affair wasn't just about attraction. It was about control. He thrived on the power he held over her. The way she lit up when he walked into the room. The way she bent to his will. But as their relationship deepened, so did Kyle's obsession. The first sign of trouble came from Daniel's girlfriend, Sarah. Sarah was perceptive, the kind of person who noticed the little things others overlooked. She couldn't ignore the way Kyle's eyes lingered on Lydia, or the way Lydia seemed flustered whenever Kyle was near. At first, Sarah dismissed her suspicions, convincing herself she was imagining things. But one night, she saw something she couldn't unsee. From her bedroom window, Sarah watched as Kyle and Lydia met in the garden. They spoke in hushed tones, their faces inches apart, their body language intimate. Sarah's stomach churned as she realized the truth. The betrayal was almost too much to bear. She loved Daniel, and the thought of exposing Lydia's secret and destroying his world was heartbreaking. But she couldn't stay silent. The next morning, Sarah confronted Lydia. The older woman broke down, pleading with Sarah to understand, to keep the affair a secret. She promised it was over, that she'd put an end to it. But Kyle wasn't ready to let go. When Lydia told him it was over, he laughed. His arrogance turned to anger, his words cutting like knives as he accused her of using him. And then came the threat that sent chills down her spine. If she ended things, he'd tell Daniel everything. Lydia was trapped. Kyle's threat loomed over her like a storm cloud. And no matter how hard she tried to distance herself, he found ways to pull her back in. He'd show up unannounced, corner her in the garden, and leave notes in places only she would find. Lydia's once peaceful sanctuary had become a prison. The breaking point came during a dinner party Lydia hosted in a desperate attempt to restore normalcy. It was a warm August evening, and the guests were laughing and sipping wine under the fairy lights strung across the garden. But the light-hearted atmosphere was shattered when Kyle arrived, uninvited and visibly intoxicated. From the moment he stepped onto the property, the tension was palpable. Kyle's behavior was erratic. His laughter was too loud, and his jokes were too sharp. He kept making inappropriate comments, veiled in just enough humor to pass as harmless. But his eyes kept drifting to Lydia, a silent reminder of the secrets they shared. Daniel was the first to confront him. Pulling Kyle aside, he demanded to know what was going on. That's when Kyle snapped. Fueled by alcohol and pent-up resentment, he let the truth spill out. He told Daniel everything. The affair, the lies, the betrayal. The revelation sent shockwaves through the party. Guests stared in stunned silence as Daniel's world came crashing down. Lydia tried to explain, but her words fell on deaf ears. Enraged and humiliated, Daniel lunged at Kyle, and the two men began to fight. The scene devolved into chaos, with guests scrambling to pull them apart. By the time the police arrived, the once beautiful garden was littered with broken glass and overturned chairs. Kyle disappeared that night, leaving the town in uproar. Lydia became the subject of endless gossip, her reputation tarnished beyond repair. Daniel, unable to forgive her, cut all ties. Weeks later, Lydia's body was found in the garden. The official ruling was suicide, a mixture of pills and alcohol, but not everyone was convinced. Some whispered that Kyle had returned, that he'd killed her to silence her. Others believed she'd been driven to despair by the weight of her guilt. But the biggest mystery came months after her death when Sarah discovered a letter tucked inside one of Lydia's gardening books. In it, Lydia hinted at another secret, one that predated Kyle and cast her life in a new light. She wrote about a man named William, a love she buried long before her marriage, a betrayal that had haunted her for decades. The letter hinted at a child born out of wedlock, a child Lydia had been forced to give up. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the child might still be alive, and that Kyle's arrival in their lives was no coincidence. Had Kyle known all along? Was his seduction of Lydia part of a twisted plan for revenge? You see, Lydia Cartwright had spent decades crafting an image of perfection. Beneath her refined exterior lay carefully buried secrets, choices made long ago that she vowed would never surface. But secrets have a way of clawing their way to the light, and Lydia's downfall began the moment Kyle walked into her life. As the fallout from their affair unfolded, Lydia was forced to confront not only the consequences of her present actions, but also the ghosts of her past. Kyle's sudden disappearance after the dinner party left the town buzzing with speculation, but for Lydia, his absence brought no relief. She knew deep down that Kyle wasn't truly gone, and she was right. A week after the chaos, Lydia received a package in the mail. Inside was a single photograph, a younger version of herself, arm in arm with a man named William Grayson. Beneath the photo was a note scrawled in a familiar hand, "I know the truth." The photo transported Lydia back nearly 45 years, to a time when she was a headstrong young woman in love with a man her family deemed unsuitable. William was a drifter, a charismatic dreamer who swept Lydia off her feet. Their affair was passionate but doomed. When Lydia discovered she was pregnant, her wealthy parents intervened. They sent William away and forced Lydia to give the baby up for adoption. She had never seen William or the child again, but the pain of that loss had haunted her ever since. The note shook Lydia to her core. How could Kyle know about William? And why was he taunting her with it now? Kyle's reappearance came just days later. He showed up at Lydia's estate unannounced, his demeanor colder and more calculating than before. He made no effort to apologize for the chaos he had caused. Instead, he dropped a bombshell. "Do you ever wonder what happened to your son?" Lydia's breath caught in her throat. She stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. "What are you talking about?" she managed to whisper. Kyle leaned in, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I'm talking about the child you abandoned, the one you gave away to strangers, the one who grew up without you." Lydia's legs buckled, and she sank into a chair. The room seemed to spin as she pieced together the implications of Kyle's words. "You're lying," she said, her voice trembling. "You couldn't possibly—" But Kyle wasn't lying. He had spent years piecing together the story of his origins, driven by a mixture of curiosity and resentment. When he discovered that Lydia Cartwright, the town's beloved matriarch, was his biological grandmother, he saw an opportunity. It wasn't enough to simply confront her. He wanted to make her pay for the life she had stolen from his father, and by extension from him. Kyle's plan had been in motion long before he ever set foot in Lydia's home. He had befriended Daniel with the sole purpose of getting close to Lydia, studying her, and exploiting her vulnerabilities. The affair, while thrilling, was just a means to an end. He wanted to dismantle her perfect life piece by piece, to strip away the facade she had built over decades. But Kyle hadn't anticipated the pull Lydia would have on him. Despite his anger, he found himself drawn to her warmth, her vulnerability, her regret. For a fleeting moment, he wondered if revenge was truly what he wanted. But the resentment ran too deep. Lydia, desperate for answers, demanded to know everything. Kyle revealed that his father, William Grayson Jr., had grown up in the foster system, bitter and angry at the world. When Kyle was born, William made it his mission to find the woman who had abandoned him. Though he never succeeded, he left behind journals detailing his search before his untimely death. Kyle had inherited those journals and picked up where his father had left off. "You ruined my father's life," Kyle spat, his voice filled with venom. "And now you expect me to feel sorry for you? To forgive you?" Lydia broke down, confessing the pain she had carried for decades. She begged Kyle to believe that she had never stopped thinking about her son, that she had tried to find him but was blocked at every turn. But Kyle wasn't interested in her excuses. "You don't get to rewrite history," he said. "You don't get to play the victim." As the weeks went on, Lydia became a prisoner in her own home. Kyle's taunts grew more frequent and more cruel. He left photographs of her son in places where she would find them, reminders of the life she had lost and the pain she had caused. He even began turning the townspeople against her, spreading rumors about her past indiscretions. Lydia's once stellar reputation crumbled, leaving her isolated and vulnerable. But Kyle's obsession with revenge began to spiral out of control. His manipulative behavior extended beyond Lydia, targeting Sarah, Daniel, and anyone who stood in his way. He threatened Sarah into silence, warning her that if she revealed the truth, he would expose her own secrets. He sabotaged Daniel's relationships and even hinted at destroying the family business. Kyle's unraveling reached its peak when Lydia decided she couldn't take it anymore. She contacted a private investigator to uncover the truth about Kyle's background. What she discovered was even more shocking than she had imagined. Kyle had a history of deceit and manipulation that stretched far beyond her family. He had conned wealthy women in multiple towns, using charm and lies to extract money and favors. Lydia realized that Kyle wasn't just seeking revenge. He was a predator, someone who thrived on chaos and destruction. The final confrontation came on a stormy night, with lightning illuminating the darkened estate. Lydia, armed with the truth about Kyle's past, confronted him in the garden, the very place where their affair had begun. She demanded that he leave, warning him that she would expose his lies if he didn't. But Kyle was unrelenting. He accused Lydia of hypocrisy, of using him just as he had used her. Their argument escalated, voices rising above the howling wind. And then, in a moment of rage, Kyle grabbed her arm. "You think you can get rid of me?" he hissed. "You think anyone will believe you over me? I'll destroy you, Lydia. Just like you destroyed my father. Lydia's scream echoed through the night, followed by the sound of a struggle. When the storm passed, the garden was eerily silent. The next morning, Lydia's body was discovered among the roses, her lifeless hand clutching a crumpled photograph of William. The official ruling was suicide, but whispers of foul play spread like wildfire. Kyle was nowhere to be found, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. Some believed he had killed her in a fit of rage. Others thought she had taken her own life out of guilt and despair. But some suspected a darker truth, that Kyle had orchestrated the entire chain of events, manipulating everyone to achieve his ultimate goal. To this day, the true circumstances of Lydia's death remain a mystery. Her legacy, once untouchable, is now a cautionary tale, a reminder of how secrets, no matter how deeply buried, have a way of coming to light. And somewhere out there, Kyle remains a shadow, his motives and whereabouts as elusive as ever.